Undercover boss orders at his pizzeria, stops cold when two waitresses reveal plan to sell his secrets. The baseball cap sat too tight on Marco's head, but he kept it low anyway. He'd owned Bella Rosa Pizzeria for 12 years, but tonight, nobody could know who he was. The door chime rang as he stepped inside at 10:47 p.m. The dining room was nearly empty, just an elderly couple finishing their meal in the corner, and a teenage kid scrolling through his phone while picking at cold fries. The smell of baked dough and oregano wrapped around him like an old friend, but something felt wrong. He couldn't name it yet. Marco slid onto a stool at the counter, keeping his eyes down. He'd grown the beard out over 3 weeks for this exact moment. The disguise wasn't perfect, but under the dim lights and exhaustion of a late shift, he was betting nobody would look too close. "What can I get you?" The voice belonged to Angela, one of his newer hires. She'd been with him for 8 months. Friendly. Punctual. Never caused problems. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from working doubles. "Just a slice," Marco said, deepening his voice slightly. "Pepperoni." "You got it." Angela turned toward the kitchen, and that's when Marco noticed her. The other waitress. Denise. She was leaning against the drink station, arms crossed, whispering something to Angela as she passed. Denise had been with him longer, almost 2 years. Quiet. Always kept to herself. He'd actually given her a raise 6 months ago because she never missed a shift. Now both women stood near the soda fountain, heads close together. Too close. Too quiet. Marco pulled out his phone and pretended to check messages, but he angled his body just right so he could hear. "He said Wednesday night," Denise whispered. "That's when the cash drawer is fullest. Marco always does the deposit Thursday mornings." Marco's blood went cold. Angela glanced toward the kitchen nervously. "You're sure he'll pay what he promised?" $2,000 each. He just needs the delivery schedule and the alarm code. What about Tony? He's the closing manager Wednesday. Won't he notice? Tony? Denise let out a short, bitter laugh. Tony spends half his shift in the back vaping and watching videos. He won't notice anything. Marco's hand tightened around his phone. His heart hammered so hard he thought they might hear it across the counter. He wanted to stand up right then, rip off the hat, and demand answers. But something stopped him. If he confronted them now, he'd blow his only chance to understand how deep this went. Angela bit her lip. "I don't know, Denise. This feels big. What if we get caught?" "We won't." Denise's voice turned sharp. "The buyer knows what he's doing. He said Marco's so busy expanding to that second location, he doesn't even check the books anymore. We give him the info, he does his thing, and we walk away clean. Nobody gets hurt." Marco felt like he'd been punched. The second location. He'd been working 18-hour days for 3 months trying to get that lease approved. He trusted his staff to hold things down here. Trusted them. "Slice is up," called a voice from the kitchen. Angela flinched, then quickly walked back toward the counter. She grabbed the plate and slid it in front of Marco with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Here you go. Can I get you anything else?" Marco looked up at her. Really looked. She couldn't have been older than 23. Young. Probably struggling with rent, student loans, all the weight that comes with barely getting by. For a second, he almost felt sorry for her. Then he remembered what she just agreed to do. "No," he said quietly. "This is perfect." Angela nodded and walked away, back toward Denise. The two of them disappeared into the kitchen together, leaving Marco alone with his slice and a rage so cold it felt like ice in his chest. He pulled out his phone again, this time opening the voice memo app. His hands shook as he hit record and slipped the phone into his jacket pocket, microphone facing out. If they were going to sell him out, he needed proof. Real proof. The pizza tasted like cardboard, but he forced himself to eat slowly. He needed to look normal. Just another late-night customer. 5 minutes later, Angela and Denise came back out. They were still talking, quieter now, but Marco's phone was recording every word. Thursday morning, before the bank opens, Denise murmured. That's when he'll make his move. We just need to make sure the side door stays unlocked. The side door? Angela's voice pitched higher. Denise, that's... Calm down. Nobody uses that entrance anyway. Marco's going to be at the new site doing inspections. I checked his calendar. Marco's jaw clenched. She'd been looking at his calendar. How long had this been planned? Angela hesitated. What if something goes wrong? Nothing will go wrong. Trust me. Marco dropped a $10 bill on the counter, more than enough for a single slice, and stood up. Both waitresses glanced his way, but only briefly. He was nobody to them. Just another face in a long shift. Thanks, he muttered, pulling his cap lower. Have a good night, Angela called out automatically. Marco pushed through the door and into the cool November air. His car was parked 3 spots down, an old Honda he'd borrowed from his cousin specifically for tonight. He sat in the driver's seat and didn't move. Didn't start the engine. Just stared at the glowing Bella Rosa sign and tried to process what he'd just heard. 2 of his employees were selling him out. Not just stealing. Not pocketing cash from the register or giving free meals to friends. They were actively working with someone on the outside, someone who wanted delivery schedules, alarm codes, and access to his business. Marco pulled the phone from his pocket and stopped the recording. 42 minutes? He'd captured 42 minutes of audio. He sat there in the dark, watching through the window as Angela wiped down tables and Denise counted the register. They looked so normal. So harmless. But Marco knew better now. He started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, his mind already racing ahead. He couldn't go to the police. Not yet. The conversation was damning, but a defense lawyer would shred it. Hearsay, they'd call it. Circumstantial. No. He needed more. He needed to catch them in the act. Prove the pattern. Find out who the buyer was and what they were really after. And he needed to do it without tipping them off. Marco drove home in silence, but his thoughts were screaming. Wednesday night, they'd said. The cash drawer. The side door. He had 5 days to stop this. 5 days to save everything he'd built. Marco sat in the borrowed Honda for 2 hours after closing time, parked across the street where the shadows from a broken streetlight kept him hidden. At 12:47 a.m., the lights inside Bella Rosa finally went dark. Angela emerged first, pulling her jacket tight against the cold. She walked to a beat-up Toyota and drove off without looking back. Denise came out 3 minutes later. But she didn't leave. She stood by the side door, the same entrance she'd mentioned in her whispered conversation, and pulled out her phone. The blue glow lit up her face as she typed something. Then she looked around, scanning the empty parking lot like she expected someone to be watching. Marco held his breath and sank lower in his seat. After a long moment, Denise pocketed her phone and walked to her car. She sat there for another 5 minutes before finally driving away. Only when her taillights disappeared around the corner did Marco exhale. His hands were shaking as he pulled out his own phone and opened the voice memo. He'd listened to it twice already on the drive home, but he needed to hear it again. Needed to make sure he hadn't imagined it. The audio crackled to life. Background noise first, the hum of the refrigerators, the distant clang of dishes. Then Denise's voice, sharp and clear. He said Wednesday night. That's when the cash drawer is fullest. Marco's stomach turned. He skipped ahead 30 seconds. 2,000 each. He just needs the delivery schedule and the alarm code. There it was. Undeniable. Real. But it still wasn't enough. He needed to connect this to something concrete. Something a lawyer couldn't explain away. Marco pulled up his contacts and dialed. It rang 4 times before a groggy voice answered. Do you know what time it is? Stephen, I need you to pull my books. Tonight. There was a pause. Stephen Chin had been Marco's accountant for 7 years. They'd started out as client and CPA, but somewhere along the way they'd become friends. Stephen knew every dollar that moved through Bella Rosa. Marco, it's 1 in the morning. I think someone's stealing from me. The sleepiness vanished from Stephen's voice. I'll be at my office in 20 minutes. Stephen's office was a cramped second-floor space above a nail salon. The neon sign below cast pink and blue shadows through the windows. Marco climbed the stairs and found Stephen already at his desk, 3 monitors glowing in front of him. Talk to me, Stephen said, not looking up from the screen. Marco played him the recording. Stephen's expression darkened with every word. When it finished, he spun his chair around to face Marco fully. You recorded this tonight? 2 hours ago. And you're sure it's Denise and Angela? Positive. Stephen turned back to his computer and started typing rapidly. Okay. If they've been skimming, there'll be a pattern. Cash shortages, inventory discrepancies, something. He pulled up 6 months of financial data and began cross-referencing shift schedules with daily deposits. Marco watched the numbers blur across the screen, his exhaustion making everything feel surreal. There, Stephen said suddenly, pointing at the monitor. Look at this. He highlighted a series of dates in red. These are all nights when your cash deposits came up short. Not by much, 50 here, 75 there. Small enough that you'd write it off as register errors or customers walking out on tabs. Marco leaned closer. How short are we talking total? Over the last 4 months? About $2,000. The number hit Marco like a slap. 2,000. The exact amount Denise had mentioned each of them would get paid. Now look at this. Stephen continued, pulling up the employee schedule. Every single one of these shortage nights has something in common. Marco's jaw clenched. Denise and Angela were both working. Exactly. And it's not random. The shortages only happen when they're scheduled together on closing shifts. Stephen sat back in his chair. That's not coincidence, Marco. That's coordination. Marco felt the rage building again, but colder now. More focused. Can we prove they took it? Not directly. The register reconciliations show shortages, but we can't prove who pocketed the cash. However, Stephen pulled up another screen. We can prove the pattern. And patterns are evidence. Especially when combined with that recording. Marco rubbed his face with both hands. It's still not enough to go to the police. Maybe not for theft charges. But it's enough to fire them. No. Marco's voice came out harder than he intended. If I fire them now, whoever they're working with goes underground. I lose my chance to find out who's really behind this. Stephen studied him carefully. What are you thinking? I'm thinking they mentioned Wednesday night for a reason. They have a plan in motion. Marco pulled out his phone and stared at the calendar. Today was Friday. I've got 5 days to figure out what they're really after and who's pulling the strings. And how exactly do you plan to do that? Marco looked up, and something in his expression made Stephen lean back slightly. By giving them exactly what they want, Marco said quietly, and watching what they do with it. Stephen shook his head slowly. That's dangerous. So is letting someone rob me blind. Marco stood up, pocketing his phone. Can you keep digging through the books? See if there's anything else we missed? Of course. But Marco, Stephen hesitated. Be careful. If these people are organized enough to plan this far ahead, they're not amateurs. Marco paused at the door. Neither am I. He walked back down to the borrowed Honda as the first gray light of dawn crept across the sky. His pizzeria would open in 4 hours. His staff would show up, smile, take orders, and act like everything was normal. And Marco would do the same. But now he knew the truth. And in 5 days, so would everyone else. Marco walked into Stephen's office at 9:30 a.m. Saturday morning carrying 2 cups of coffee and a folder he'd stayed up all night preparing. He'd barely slept. His mind kept replaying Denise's voice, Angela's nervous questions, the casual way they'd discussed betraying him. Stephen looked up from his computer, dark circles under his eyes. He'd clearly been working through the night too. Please tell me one of those is for me, Stephen said, reaching for the coffee. Marco handed it over and dropped into the chair across from him. Find anything else? More than I wanted to. Stephen pulled up a spreadsheet that made Marco's head hurt just looking at it. I went back further. 8 months, to when Angela first started. And? The shortages started exactly 2 weeks after she was hired. Stephen highlighted another column. Before that? Your books were clean. Tight. Every deposit matched to the penny. Marco felt something twist in his chest. He'd hired Angela himself. She'd seemed so eager, so grateful for the opportunity. Fresh out of community college with a hospitality certificate and a smile that could light up a room. How much total? Marco asked quietly. Just over $4,000. Maybe more. These are just the discrepancies I can document. Stephen took a long drink of coffee. But here's what's interesting. The pattern changed 3 months ago. He pulled up another screen. See this? For the first 5 months, the shortages were random. $20 here, $40 there. Different nights, different amounts. Like someone testing the waters, seeing what they could get away with. And then? Then it became systematic. Stephen pointed to a clear pattern emerging in the data. Same nights every week. Same approximate amounts. And always, when both Denise and Angela were closing together. Marco leaned forward, studying the numbers. They got organized. Exactly. Someone taught them how to do this properly. How to skim without triggering alerts. How to keep the amounts small enough that you'd never notice. Stephen's expression darkened. Marco, this isn't amateur hour. Whoever they're working with knows restaurant operations inside and out. The coffee turned bitter in Marco's mouth. Could it be someone I know? Another restaurant owner? Maybe. Or someone who's done this before. Stephen pulled out a notepad covered in his neat handwriting. I made some calls this morning. Discreet ones? To other accountants I know who handle restaurants. Marco's pulse quickened. And? 3 other pizzerias in the county reported similar patterns over the last year. Small, consistent losses. Always tied to specific employees working together. The owners either wrote it off as shrinkage or fired the workers without pressing charges. Did they catch who was behind it? Stephen shook his head. That's just it. Nobody dug deeper. They cut their losses and moved on. But Marco, if this is the same operation hitting multiple restaurants. He trailed off, the implications hanging heavy in the air. Marco stood up and walked to the window, staring down at the street below. A family was walking into the nail salon, the little girl skipping ahead of her parents. Normal people living normal lives, completely unaware that 2 floors above them, someone's entire livelihood was crumbling. They mentioned a buyer. Marco said, still facing the window. Someone willing to pay $2,000 each for delivery schedules and alarm codes. That's not about skimming cash from the register anymore. No, Stephen agreed. That's about access. They're selling information for something bigger. Marco turned around. What's worth more than $4,000 to someone who already knows how to run this kind of operation? Stephen was quiet for a long moment. Then, everything. Your entire inventory. Equipment. Hell, with your delivery schedule and alarm code, they could clean you out on a night when nobody's there to stop them. Take it all and be gone before you even know you've been hit. The words settled over Marco like ice water. Everything he'd built. 12 years of 16-hour days, missed birthdays, skipped vacations. The second location he was trying to open so he could finally give his daughter the college fund she deserved. All of it vulnerable because 2 people he trusted had decided he was worth more in pieces than as their employer. I need names, Marco said, his voice steady despite the fury burning in his chest. The other restaurants that got hit. I want to talk to the owners. Stephen hesitated. Marco, I'm not going in angry. I just need to know what I'm dealing with. If this is organized, if there's a pattern, maybe someone saw something. A face. A vehicle. Anything. Stephen studied him for a long moment, then nodded and wrote down 3 names and phone numbers. They're expecting your call. I told them you might reach out. Marco pocketed the paper. Thank you for all of this. Just promise me you'll be smart about whatever comes next. Marco managed a tight smile. Smart is all I've got right now. Smart and 5 days until Wednesday. He left Steven's office with more questions than answers, but one thing was crystallizing in his mind. This wasn't just about two waitresses stealing cash. This was about someone running a calculated operation to strip his business bare. And Marco intended to find out who before they got the chance. His phone buzzed as he reached his car. A text from Tony, his closing manager. Boss, we're short on mozzarella for tonight. Want me to hit the distributor? Marco stared at the message, an idea forming. He typed back, no, I'll handle it. Need to talk to them about the new location anyway. Sometimes the best information came from people who weren't even trying to give it. Marco pulled into the parking lot of Russo Food Distributors at 11:15 a.m. The warehouse sprawled across 2 acres, its loading docks busy with Saturday deliveries. He'd been buying from Russo for 9 years, longer than he'd known most of his current staff. Frank Russo himself was supervising a delivery when Marco walked in. The old man's face lit up when he saw him. Marco! Didn't expect to see you today. Tony usually handles the weekend pickups. Frank wiped his hands on his apron and extended one for a shake. Marco took it, forcing warmth into his smile. Needed to get out of the office. Too much paperwork for the new location. How's that coming along? The lease finalized yet? Getting close. Another week, maybe 2. Marco followed Frank toward the refrigerated section where the mozzarella was stored. Actually, I wanted to ask you about changing our delivery schedule once the second place opens. I'll need to coordinate both locations. Frank nodded, pulling open the massive cooler door. Makes sense. We can work something out. He paused, giving Marco an odd look. Though I gotta say, I was surprised when you changed the delivery times last week. Thought you were a creature of habit. Marco's blood went cold. What? The delivery times. Tuesday and Thursday mornings at 6, right? You called last week and moved Tuesday to 8. Frank grabbed 2 boxes of fresh mozzarella and set them on a dolly. My driver said nobody was there to receive it at the new time, so he left it by the side door like the message said. Marco's mind raced. The side door. Yeah. Is that a problem? The note said you'd be doing inspections at the new site and couldn't be there for the early delivery. Frank's expression shifted to concern. Marco, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Frank, I never called to change any delivery time. Marco's voice came out tight. And I never left any note about the side door. The color drained from Frank's face. What? What number did they call from? Frank pulled out his phone, scrolling through his recent calls. Here, last Tuesday, 2:47 p.m. He showed Marco the screen. Marco didn't recognize the number. He pulled out his own phone and took a picture of it. Did you talk to them directly? No, it was a message. A woman. She said she was calling from your office, that you were too busy with the expansion to handle it yourself. Frank set down the mozzarella, his hands shaking slightly. Jesus, Marco. I've been in this business 30 years. I should have verified. What exactly did the message say? Frank closed his eyes, trying to remember. That you needed Tuesday deliveries moved to 8 a.m. starting next week, and that the driver should leave everything by the side entrance because the front would be locked during renovations. She knew your account number, knew exactly what you order. I had no reason to doubt it. Marco felt like the ground was shifting under his feet. Did the driver actually leave the delivery there? Yeah. He said everything was gone when he came back by later that afternoon, so he figured someone grabbed it. Frank's face had gone pale. Marco, if someone's impersonating your business, they're not impersonating. They're infiltrating. Marco pulled out his notepad and started writing. Frank, I need you to do something for me. Don't change anything about what you just told me, but from now on, any delivery changes need to come directly from me. Call my cell, verify my voice. Of course. Absolutely. Frank hesitated. Should I call the police? Not yet. I need to handle this carefully. Marco looked up from his notes. If anyone else calls claiming to be from Bella Rosa, I need you to play along. Tell them whatever they want to hear. But then call me immediately. Can you do that? Frank nodded slowly. You're setting a trap. I'm protecting my business. Marco picked up the mozzarella boxes. How much do I owe you? It's on the house. After what I just told you, it's the least I can do. Marco wanted to argue, but he could see the guilt on Frank's face. Thank you? And Frank? Not a word about this conversation. To anyone. You have my word. Marco sat in his car outside the warehouse, staring at the photo of the unknown phone number. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles went white. They'd already started. The plan Denise and Angela had whispered about wasn't scheduled for Wednesday. It was already in motion. They'd been testing his security, probing for weaknesses, establishing patterns. The side door. The same entrance Denise had mentioned unlocking. The delivery schedule they'd requested from the buyer. It was all connected. Marco pulled up his phone and called Tony. Hey, boss. Did you grab the mozzarella? Tony, I need you to check something for me. Last Tuesday morning, did we receive a delivery at 8 a.m.? There was a pause. Tuesday? No, deliveries come at 6. I wasn't even there at 8-inch. Check the inventory logs. See if there's any record of receiving product that day. Marco heard Tony moving around, the rustle of papers. Yeah, here it is. Signed for at 8:14 a.m. 2 boxes mozzarella, 1 case tomatoes. Another pause. That's weird. The signature isn't mine. Whose is it? I think it's Denise's handwriting. But she doesn't usually handle deliveries. Why would she? Tony, I need you to do me a favor and not ask questions right now. Can you do that? Sure, boss. Everything okay? It will be. I'll explain everything soon. Marco ended the call before Tony could press further. He sat there in the parking lot, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Denise had taken that delivery. She'd been there at the side door, exactly where she told Angela it would be left. She'd already successfully intercepted 1 shipment, tested whether the system worked. Now she was confident enough to plan something bigger. Wednesday night. The cash drawer. The alarm code. But Marco knew something they didn't. He was 4 steps ahead now, and he wasn't stopping until he knew everything. He started the engine and pulled out onto the highway, his mind already planning the next move. They wanted to play games with his delivery schedule? Fine. He'd give them a delivery they'd never forget. Monday morning, Marco sat in his office with the door locked, staring at the calendar on his wall. Wednesday was 2 days away. He'd spent all of Sunday going over his options, and there was only one play that made sense. He needed to force their hand. Make them show themselves before Wednesday. Marco opened his laptop and pulled up the employee scheduling software. Then he created a fake internal memo, the kind he'd send to his managers about operational changes. Confidential, management only. Tuesday night special cash pickup. Due to bank maintenance, this week's deposit will be handled by Armored Car Service. Pickup scheduled for 11:30 p.m. Tuesday at rear service entrance. Cash bag will be prepared and placed in the drop box by the side door at 11 p.m. Only closing manager and designated staff should be aware. Marco read it 3 times, making sure it looked authentic. Then he did something he never thought he'd do. He deliberately sent it to the wrong group. Instead of just managers, he added Denise and Angela to the recipient list. He made it look like an accident, like he'd clicked the wrong distribution group in his haste. They'd see it, think they'd stumbled onto valuable information, and they'd have no reason to suspect it was bait. Marco hit send and sat back, his heart pounding. Now came the hard part, waiting. By Monday evening, Marco had positioned himself in a rental car across from Bella Rosa, a different vehicle this time, a gray sedan that blended into the street. He'd parked where he could see both the main entrance and the side door. His phone buzzed. A text from Steven. You sure about this? Marco typed back, no. Doing it anyway. At 9:47 p.m., his phone rang. Tony. Boss, did you mean to send that memo to the whole staff? The one about the cash pickup? Marco kept his voice calm. What memo? The one about Tuesday night. The armored car service. It went to everyone, not just managers. Damn it, Marco made his voice sound frustrated. I must have clicked the wrong group. Can you delete it from the system? Already did. But people might have seen it already. It's fine. The armored car company has their schedule. It won't matter if the staff knows. Marco paused. Actually, don't mention it to anyone. I don't want people thinking I'm making careless mistakes with the new location opening. Got it, boss. Your secret's safe. Marco ended the call and smiled grimly. Tony had just confirmed that the memo went out, which meant Denise and Angela had definitely seen it. Now he waited to see if they'd take the bait. Tuesday crawled by like a prison sentence. Marco went through the motions at the restaurant, checking inventory, talking to customers, pretending everything was normal. He caught Denise's eye twice during the dinner rush, and both times she looked away quickly. She knew. She had to. At 10:30 p.m., Marco left through the front door, making a show of heading home. He waved to Tony, called out goodnight to the kitchen staff, and drove away in his regular car. Then he circled back, parked the rental 3 blocks away, and returned on foot through the alley. By 11 p.m., he was crouched behind a dumpster with a clear view of the side door. The night was cold enough that he could see his breath, and the smell of rotting garbage made his eyes water, but he didn't move. At 11:17 p.m., headlights swept across the alley. A black SUV rolled to a stop about 30 feet from the side door. The engine idled, but nobody got out. Marco pulled out his phone and started recording video, his hands shaking from cold and adrenaline. 3 minutes passed. Then 5. At 11:23, the side door opened from the inside. Denise stepped out, looking both ways before pulling something from her pocket. Even from this distance, Marco could see it was her phone. She held it up, the screen glowing, and pointed it toward the SUV, like she was signaling. The SUV's headlights flashed twice in response. Marco's finger hovered over his phone, ready to call the police. But then something stopped him. If he called now, they'd arrest Denise for what? Standing outside during her shift? The SUV hadn't done anything illegal. They were just parked in an alley. He needed more. Denise checked her watch, then looked back inside the building. She was waiting for something. Or someone. At 11:28, she went back inside, leaving the door propped open with a brick. Marco's blood ran cold. She'd left it unlocked. Just like she'd told Angela she would. The SUV's engine revved slightly, but it still didn't move. Whoever was inside was waiting too. At 11:31, a figure emerged from the side door carrying something. Marco zoomed in with his phone camera, his heart hammering. It was Angela. She had a black bag in her hands, the kind banks use for cash deposits. Except there was no cash inside. Marco had made sure of that. He'd filled it with cut newspaper and marked bills that Steven had helped him prepare, each one photographed and documented. Angela walked quickly toward the SUV. The rear window rolled down, and a hand reached out. Marco couldn't see the person's face, just a dark sleeve and pale fingers. Angela handed over the bag. The hand disappeared back into the SUV, and for a moment, nothing happened. Marco held his breath, his phone camera recording everything. Then the rear door of the SUV opened, and someone stepped out. Marco's entire body went rigid. He recognized that face. It was Vincent Cardelli, the owner of Papa V's, a pizza chain with 6 locations across the county. Marco had met him twice at restaurant association meetings. They talked about suppliers, staffing challenges, the usual industry gossip. Vincent had seemed friendly, successful, legitimate. Now he was standing in Marco's alley at 11:30 at night, taking a cash bag from Marco's employee. Vincent opened the bag, examined the contents briefly under the SUV's interior light, then looked at Angela with an expression Marco couldn't quite read. He said something, too quiet for Marco to hear, and Angela nodded. Then Vincent pulled out an envelope and handed it to her. The payment. $2,000, just like Denise had promised. Angela took the envelope, glanced back toward the side door nervously, and hurried back inside. Vincent climbed back into the SUV. Marco made a split-second decision. He stepped out from behind the dumpster, phone still recording, and walked directly toward the vehicle. The SUV's engine roared to life. "Vincent!" Marco shouted. The headlights blazed on, blinding him. Tires screeched against pavement. Marco jumped back as the SUV peeled out of the alley, its rear bumper missing him by inches. He stood there in the empty alley, breathing hard, the smell of burned rubber in his nose. But he was smiling. Because he just recorded everything. And now he knew exactly who was behind this. The question was, how many other restaurants had Vincent Cardelli destroyed before targeting his? Marco looked down at his phone, at the frozen image of Vincent's face clearly visible in the frame. "Got you," he whispered. Marco didn't sleep Tuesday night. He sat at his kitchen table until 4 a.m., watching the video over and over, his coffee going cold beside him. Vincent Cardelli. A man with 6 successful locations. A man who didn't need to steal from struggling single-location owners. And yet there he was, clear as day, taking a cash bag from Marco's employee in the middle of the night. But why? At 6:30 a.m., Marco called Stephen. "Please tell me you have good news," Stephen answered, his voice thick with sleep. "I know who the buyer is." That woke him up. "What? Who?" "Vincent Cardelli. Owns Papa V's." Silence. Then, "The chain guy?" "Marco, that doesn't make sense. He's rich? Successful?" "I know," Marco rubbed his eyes. "That's what bothers me. He doesn't need the money. So what's he really after? Let me dig into his finances. Give me 2 hours." Marco spent those 2 hours pacing his apartment, trying to piece it together. Vincent had positioned himself perfectly, close enough to the industry to understand operations, successful enough that nobody would suspect him. The perfect cover. At 8:47 a.m., Stephen called back. "Marco, sit down for this." "I'm already sitting. Papa V's is hemorrhaging money." 3 of his 6 locations are underwater. He's 6 months behind on supplier payments, and 2 of his landlords are threatening eviction. Stephen's voice was grim. From the outside, everything looks fine. But his books are a disaster. Marco's mind raced. So he's using stolen information to, what? Sabotage competition? More than that. I called a friend who works in commercial real estate. Guess who's been quietly buying up failed restaurant properties over the last year? Vincent. His shell company, yes. He buys them for pennies on the dollar, converts them to Papa V's locations, and flips the narrative to look like expansion instead of desperation. Stephen paused. Marco, I think he's been systematically targeting independent pizzerias. Get inside information, orchestrate losses, wait for them to go under, then swoop in and buy the property cheap. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The 3 other restaurants Stephen had mentioned, the ones with similar theft patterns. Marco would bet anything those locations were now Papa V's franchises. He's not stealing money, Marco said quietly. He's stealing businesses. And yours is next. That second location you're trying to open? It's in a prime area. If you go under before the lease is finalized, he takes it. Marco stood up, anger flooding through him. That's why they wanted delivery schedules and alarm codes. He's not planning a simple robbery. He's planning something that will destroy my reputation. Health code violations. Missing inventory. Maybe even a break-in that makes me look incompetent. What are you going to do? Marco looked at his phone, at the frozen image of Vincent's face. Something stupid, probably. Marco. I need to talk to him. Face to face. That's insane. You should go to the police. And tell them what? That a successful businessman met with my employee in an alley? The video shows him taking a bag, but we can't prove what was inside. His lawyers would bury this in paperwork. Marco grabbed his keys. No. I need him to show his hand. All of it. How? Marco smiled, but there was no warmth in it. By giving him exactly what he wants. Marco pulled up the Papa V's corporate number and called from a burner phone he'd bought that morning. A receptionist answered. Papa V's corporate office, how may I direct your call? Marco deepened his voice, letting nervousness creep into it. I need to speak with Vincent Cardelli. It's about Bella Rosa Pizzeria. A pause. May I ask who's calling? Tell him it's someone who works there. Someone who wants to make a deal. One moment, please. The hold music lasted less than 30 seconds. Then a smooth voice came on the line. This is Vincent. Marco's grip tightened on the phone. We need to meet. Today. I'm sorry, who is this? You know exactly who this is. Or at least, you know what I have access to. Marco kept his voice shaky, like a nervous employee in over their head. The alarm codes. The delivery schedules. Everything Denise promised you. A long silence. Then, I think you have me confused with. I was there last night. I saw the cash bag exchange. I know what you paid Angela. Marco paused. And I know it's not enough. He could almost hear Vincent recalculating on the other end of the line. What do you want? 5,000. Cash. And I want to understand the full scope of what we're doing. I'm not going to be the fall guy when this goes south. Another pause. Where? Coffee shop on Maple Street. 2 p.m. Come alone. How will I recognize you? Marco almost laughed. I'll be the one who looks terrified. Because I am. He hung up before Vincent could respond. 3 hours later, Marco sat in a corner booth at the coffee shop, a baseball cap pulled low, watching the door. He'd positioned himself so he could see everyone who entered, and he had his real phone hidden in his jacket pocket, recording. At 2:04 p.m., Vincent Cardelli walked in. He looked different in daylight, older, more tired. The confident restaurant owner from the association meetings was gone, replaced by someone who looked like they were holding on by their fingernails. Vincent scanned the room, spotted Marco, and walked over. You're younger than I expected, Vincent said, sliding into the booth. Marco kept his eyes down. Age doesn't matter when you're desperate. No, Vincent leaned back, studying him. I suppose it doesn't. So, you want in? I want to understand what I'm risking my job for. Vincent smiled. Smart. Most people just take the money and don't ask questions. He ordered a coffee from a passing waitress, then turned back to Marco. Here's how it works. You give me information. Delivery schedules. Security gaps. Employee habits. I use that information to create opportunities. What kind of opportunities? The kind that make independent restaurants look unreliable. Shipments go missing. Cash counts come up short. Health inspectors find problems during surprise visits. Vincent's voice was casual, like he was discussing the weather. Eventually, the owner can't handle the pressure. They sell. And I'm there with an offer. Marco felt sick. You've done this before. 7 times in the last 18 months. Your boss would be number 8. Vincent leaned forward. Marco Rossi thinks he's building an empire. 2 locations. Maybe more. But he's stretched too thin. One good push, and he'll crumble. And Denise and Angela? Useful tools. When this is done, they'll disappear. New jobs in different cities. Clean break, Vincent's eyes narrowed. But you're not really one of Marco's employees, are you? Marco's blood froze. Vincent pulled out his phone and showed Marco a photo, security footage from inside Bella Rosa, showing Marco in his disguise at the counter Friday night. I've been doing this long enough to know when someone's playing games, Vincent said quietly. So let's skip the act. Who are you really, And what do you want? Marco pulled off his baseball cap and looked Vincent directly in the eye. I'm Marco Rossi. And I want you to admit everything you just said one more time. He pulled out his phone and set it on the table, the red recording light visible. Vincent's face went white. For 5 seconds, Vincent Cardelli didn't move. He stared at the recording phone on the table like it was a loaded gun. Then he lunged for it. Marco was faster. He grabbed the phone and stood up, stepping back from the booth. Every eye in the coffee shop turned toward them. Sit down, Vincent, Marco said quietly. Unless you want me to play this recording right here, right now, for everyone to hear. Vincent's jaw clenched, but he slowly sank back into his seat. His face had gone from white to red, veins bulging at his temples. You have no idea what you're doing, Vincent hissed. I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm protecting my business from a parasite. Marco pocketed the phone. 7 restaurants, you said? 7 families you destroyed so you could expand your failing empire. It's not. Vincent stopped himself, glancing around at the other customers. He lowered his voice. You can't prove anything. That recording isn't admissible. I'll have lawyers. I don't need it to be admissible in court. I just need it to be public. Marco leaned against the table. Imagine what the Restaurant Association will think. Your suppliers. Your landlords. Everyone who trusts Papa V's brand. What happens when they find out you've been running a sabotage operation? Vincent's hands were shaking. What do you want? Money? I can pay you. I want you to leave my employees alone. I want the names of every restaurant you've targeted. And I want you to turn yourself into the police. Vincent actually laughed, a bitter, broken sound. You're insane. I'm not confessing to anything. Then I'll do it for you. Marco pulled out his regular phone. I've got Detective Ramirez on speed dial. She's been very interested in the string of restaurant failures in this county. Wait. Vincent held up a hand, sweat beading on his forehead. Just wait. Let me explain. I'm listening. Vincent slumped in his seat, suddenly looking much older. It started small. One location doing poorly. I thought if I could just redirect some business, make the competition look bad, I could recover. But it spiraled. Each new location needed more capital. More customers. I couldn't stop. So you decided to destroy people instead. I didn't destroy anyone. Vincent's voice rose, then dropped again quickly. I gave them fair market value for their properties. They got out before bankruptcy ruined them completely. I helped them. You helped yourself. Marco's disgust was evident. And you recruited my employees to do it. Denise and Angela, did they know the full plan? Or did you lie to them too? Vincent looked away. They knew enough. I offered them money. They accepted. Because they're struggling. Because I can't pay them enough with rent prices the way they are. Marco felt the anger rising again. You preyed on desperation. Yours and theirs. So what now? Vincent's voice was hollow. You ruin me? Destroy everything I've built? Marco was quiet for a long moment. Then he sat back down across from Vincent. Here's what's going to happen. Tonight you're going to meet me at Bella Rosa at midnight. You're going to walk in that front door, and you're going to tell Denise and Angela exactly what you used them for. Every detail. Vincent's eyes widened. Why would I? Because if you don't, I send this recording to every news outlet in the state by 1 a.m. Your choice. At 11:47 p.m., Marco stood in the dark dining room of Bella Rosa, waiting. He'd sent a text to Denise and Angela an hour earlier, emergency staff meeting. Midnight. Mandatory. They'd both responded with confused confirmations. At 11:53, Denise arrived first, looking nervous. Marco? What's this about? You'll see. Wait here. Angela came in 2 minutes later. Is everything okay? Did something happen? Sit down, Marco said, gesturing to a booth. Both of you. They exchanged worried glances but obeyed. At exactly midnight, the front door opened. Vincent Cardelli walked in, his face ashen. Denise gasped. Angela's hand flew to her mouth. You, Denise whispered. What are you? Tell them, Marco said to Vincent. Everything. Vincent stood there, looking between the two women and Marco. For a moment, Marco thought he might run. But then something in Vincent seemed to break. I lied to you, Vincent said quietly. The money I promised. The clean break. The new jobs. All lies. Angela stood up. What are you talking about? I've been using you. Both of you. To sabotage this restaurant so I could buy it cheap when Marco went under. Vincent's voice was mechanical, defeated. You were never going to get your money. You were going to be arrested when the theft was discovered, and I was going to disappear. Denise's face crumbled. No. You said? I say a lot of things. I've said them to employees at 7 other restaurants in the past year. Every one of them is now a Papa V's location. Vincent looked at Marco. Happy now? Marco pulled out his phone and stopped the recording. He'd captured every word. Denise. Angela. He turned to them, and they both flinched. Do either of you have anything you want to say? Angela started crying. I'm so sorry. My student loans, my rent, I couldn't. I don't want excuses. Marco's voice was hard. I want to know how long you've been stealing from me. Denise couldn't look at him. 6 months. Maybe more. $4,000, Marco said. Plus whatever you were planning for Wednesday. Wednesday? Vincent frowned. What's Wednesday? Nothing, Denise said quickly. They were planning to rob me blind while I was at the new location, Marco said. Give you the alarm codes? Let you clean out the inventory. Wasn't that the plan? Denise broke down. I didn't want to. Vincent said if we didn't help with the big score, he'd tell you about the cash we'd already taken. He was blackmailing us. Vincent's expression didn't change. He didn't deny it. Marco looked at all 3 of them, the man who'd tried to destroy his business, and the 2 employees who'd betrayed his trust. His hands were shaking with rage, but his voice stayed steady. I called the police 15 minutes ago. They're on their way. Angela's sobs got louder. Denise just stared at the table. Vincent finally met Marco's eyes. You really going through with this? Every single bit of it. At 12:17 a.m., red and blue lights flooded through the windows. Detective Ramirez walked in with 2 uniformed officers. Mr. Rossi, she said. We got your message. Marco handed her his phone. Everything you need is on here. Video. Audio. Confessions. As the officers handcuffed all 3 of them, Angela looked back at Marco one last time. I really am sorry, she whispered. Marco didn't respond. He just watched as they were led out into the night, one after another, until his restaurant was empty and silent again. He sat down in the booth and put his head in his hands. 12 years of building trust. Gone in 6 months because he'd been too busy to notice. But at least it was over. 1 week later, Marco stood in front of Bella Rosa at 5:30 a.m., watching the sunrise paint the sky orange and pink. The crime scene tape was gone. The locks had been changed. And today, for the first time since everything fell apart, he was opening his restaurant with a crew he could trust. The investigation had moved fast. Vincent's confession, combined with Marco's recordings and Stephen's financial evidence, had unraveled the entire operation. The district attorney called it one of the most elaborate fraud schemes she'd seen in 20 years. Vincent faced charges in 8 counties. The other restaurant owners he targeted were coming forward, their stories heartbreakingly similar to Marco's. Small losses? Strange patterns? Employees who disappeared right before their businesses collapsed. Denise and Angela had been arrested on theft and conspiracy charges. Angela's lawyer was negotiating a plea deal. She'd agreed to testify against Vincent in exchange for reduced charges. Denise was fighting it, claiming she'd been coerced. Marco didn't care anymore. That was for the courts to decide. He unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The smell of oregano and rising dough greeted him. Tony had come in early to prep. Marco found him in the kitchen, kneading pizza dough with the intensity of someone working out their feelings. "Boss," Tony said, looking up. "Didn't expect you this early? Couldn't sleep." Marco grabbed an apron. "Mind if I help?" They worked in silence for a while, the familiar rhythm of preparation calming Marco's racing thoughts. Finally, Tony spoke. "I should have noticed. The cash shortages. The weird schedule changes. I was the closing manager. I should have." "Stop," Marco looked at him. "Vincent was running this operation for over a year. He knew exactly how to hide it. This wasn't your fault. Still feels like it." "Yeah. It does." Marco shaped a ball of dough, his hands moving automatically. "But we're still here. That's what matters." At 6:15, the new hires started arriving. Marco had spent the past week interviewing replacements, a grueling process of checking references, running background checks, and trusting his gut. He'd hired 3 people: a college student named Maria, a retired teacher named Patricia, and a young guy named Jerome who'd recently moved from Chicago. He'd been honest with all of them about what happened. They deserved to know. By 8 a.m., Marco gathered everyone in the dining room: Tony, the 3 new hires, his 2 longtime cooks, and his delivery driver Carlos. "I'm not going to pretend the last week didn't happen," Marco started. "You all know what Denise and Angela did. You know about Vincent Cardelli and his operation. And you probably know that this almost destroyed everything I've built." The staff was quiet, listening. "I could blame myself. I could blame the economy, or employee wages, or a dozen other things. But the truth is simpler. I stopped paying attention. I got so focused on expanding, on building something bigger, that I forgot to protect what I already had." Marco looked around at their faces. "That changes today. New security system gets installed this afternoon. All delivery schedules go through me personally. Cash deposits happen twice daily instead of once. And most importantly, if any of you see something wrong, you come to me. Immediately. No fear of retaliation. No worrying about your job. You speak up, and I listen." Patricia raised her hand. "What about the second location?" Marco smiled, but it was bittersweet. "On hold. Maybe permanently. I need to make sure this place is solid before I think about expanding." "That's wise," she said quietly. "I also want to talk about wages." Marco pulled out a folder he'd prepared. "I can't compete with corporate chains on pay. But I can be fair. Everyone here is getting a raise, effective immediately. And I'm implementing a profit-sharing program. If we do well, you do well." Maria's eyes widened. "Seriously?" "Seriously. You're not just employees. You're the people who kept this place running when I wasn't watching. That deserves recognition." Tony wiped his eyes quickly. "Boss, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. Because I can't do this without you. Any of you." Marco set down the folder. "Bella Rosa isn't just my restaurant. It's ours. And I'm not letting anyone, not Vincent, not desperate people making bad choices, not even my own ambition, destroy that again." That night, after the dinner rush ended and the last customer left, Marco found himself alone in the dining room again. He walked to the counter, sat down on the same stool he'd occupied a week ago in disguise, and pulled out his phone. He called the kitchen. "Tony, you still back there?" "Yeah, boss. Just finishing cleanup. Can you make me a slice?" "Pepperoni. Coming right up." 5 minutes later, Tony brought out a perfect slice, cheese bubbling, pepperoni crisp at the edges, crust golden brown. "On the house," Tony said. "Thanks." Marco took a bite, and for the first time in a week, the pizza tasted right. Not like cardboard. Not like betrayal. Just like home. Tony lingered by the counter. "You okay, boss?" Marco thought about the question. Was he okay? He'd lost 2 employees to greed. Nearly lost his business to sabotage. Spent a week drowning in police interviews and legal paperwork. The lease for the second location had fallen through when the landlord heard about the investigation. But he still had his restaurant. Still had loyal people beside him. Still had the chance to rebuild trust, one slice at a time. Yeah, Marco said finally. I think I am. Tony nodded and headed back to the kitchen, leaving Marco alone with his pizza. Outside, the neon Bella Rosa sign flickered against the dark sky. Marco watched people walk past, families, couples, kids heading home from late practices. Normal people living normal lives, completely unaware of the battle that had been fought inside these walls. But Marco knew. And he'd never forget. He finished his slice, wiped his hands, and walked to the door. Before turning off the lights, he looked back at the empty dining room, the booths where families laughed, the counter where regulars shared their stories, the kitchen where food was made with care. This was worth fighting for. Worth protecting. Marco locked the door behind him and walked to his car. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, depositions, insurance claims, the slow process of rebuilding reputation. But tonight he'd won. His business survived because he'd chosen patience over panic, evidence over emotion, and trust in the right people over blind faith in everyone. As he drove home, Marco's phone buzzed. A text from Steven: "Final count is in. After legal fees and restitution, you'll recover about 60% of what was stolen." Not perfect, but not bad. Marco smiled. Not perfect. But not bad. He could live with that. Because Bella Rosa was still standing. And this time, he'd make damn sure it stayed that way.